very meticulous thing, and the concept of habitation is central to who you are. So a people defines itself by its architecture. If I say Pretoria and I say Johannesburg and I say Cape Town in the same country, I'm talking about three different images, and they talk culture, they talk a people's pride, they talk the meaning, and they talk the language of that people.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to join us this morning.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. The first question would be for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey into architecture and why you decided to come into the path, to take this path of architecture.
Okay. My name is Lekwalo, Mosienyane. I'm an architect, I'm an urban designer. I'm registered to practice architecture and design and town planning. Yeah, I practiced architecture in England, outside Europe, in many countries in Africa, including Botswana, South Africa, Kenya, Ghana. Those are the areas where my main work can be seen.
But how did you get into architecture? I'm sure when you were growing up, was it like
Yes, I was raised in a family of 9 siblings, and a very progressive mom and dad. They came from Ramuso, yet most of us were born in the Ubirwa area, Kwaramangata. And my father and mother determined what we were going to do, from veterinary surgeons to economists to mechanical engineers to agriculturalists to animal nutritionists and so on. And mom and dad may not have known what is an animal nutritionist or what is an architect, but I was just going to be a builder. And dad said, For me, then, when I got to secondary school, I had it at the back of my mind that I had to be a builder. But I didn't like it. I really wanted to be something sophisticated. Like, my brother's an economist, and I think he's sophisticated. I wanted to be fine like that. But I realized that in building, there was something called architecture. That meant from as far back as Form 1, I was reading on buildings and reading on architecture. And I got hooked. I had artistic flair. So even right from primary school, so I was sketching and drawing, not knowing what I was doing. But the rest is history.
The layman architecture could be just about buildings, what they see, but you have so much experience and knowledge within the industry. How do you now, personally, from the experience that you have, define architecture? What is architecture to you now that you are where you are?
Yeah, architecture is an art, it's a science, it's a social science, it's all those things. Architecture is a branch of anthropology. It's about accommodating and nurturing men. If you think of men, human beings, their size, their needs, your needs when you get into any size or shape of space, if you're going to a door, the door must be the size of man and accommodate any man and all men. The steps that you climb, the bed you sleep on, literally up to the coffin, from cradle to your last day, you are looked after by an architect who's accommodating you. Now, what is architecture? For it to be architecture, it has to be pleasing to the men's eye. It's architects who build those cathedrals. We design for God. And it has to be beautiful. Remember Solomon when he was asked by God to build him a temple. God described the beauty of that temple, even the materials. We are trained to see and know beauty and to be the torch that shines the beauty. It represents our communities in what is beautiful, and we must be in alignment with our people to say, indeed, that is beautiful. That's one aspect. When it's beautiful, it has to be structurally competent. In other words, it must be a piece of sculpture. It must be seen to be able to stand on its own and fend for the human being that is accommodating. And finally, it has to have a function, a defined function. You should be able to look at that piece of architecture and say, that's a cathedral. It shouldn't be confused. A cathedral should not be confused with a police station or a hospital. A hospital is a hospital. Remember, a hospital accommodates people. So does a hotel. So does a prison. Now, if you take these three alien typologies, they all perform a function of accommodating a human being, be it in a bedroom or in a police cell or in a ward, in a hospital. But those three buildings, you should be able to look at it and say that's a prison. Be able to look at the hotel and say that's a beautiful hotel. You should be able to look at a hospital and say, wow, or you must actually, it must tell you what it's standing there for. Then it's architecture. It must have those three elements.
Does the aesthetics speak to the function, or the function speaks to the aesthetics?
Very important question. Even in sculpture, when I say something must be structurally sound, it can be structurally sound and still be a building and not architecture. But I'm saying it must be sculpturally competent. The structure in it talks to sculpture. So for me as an architect, so even the sculpture must be beautiful. It must be functional. Listen, I said it must be beautiful. Yes, beautiful. But the function itself, how it functions, it must flow. It must talk to your senses. If you're claustrophobic, for instance, fearing spaces, and they're designed, I knew you were, I would design a bathroom that doesn't make you feel like you are cramped in. And it must be beautiful too. So the whole thing is the beauty that I'm talking about, that must be beautiful, it must be functional, and it must be structurally competent or a piece of sculpture. All these things are intrinsic and they are built into each other. So you're not going to have a beautiful painting. I paint and I make sculpture. I've got my piece of sculpture behind me here. And those pieces of sculpture must be beautiful, must be able to stand, but they're not architecture because they don't have the function. So even in a painting, you may have elements of functionality. But once you bring all these elements together, beauty, sculptural competence, and function, voila, it's architecture.
Making me want to dive further, but let's stick to the introductions first, right? So you wear multiple hats as an architect, urban designer, and a town planner, right? These are like different roles, but I want to know how those intersect and intertwine, because I'm sure that it's not like that. They function separately from one another.
Yes, the architecture and urban design are very related. Architecture is about buildings, individual buildings. I mustn't be misunderstood to be saying a building that stays in itself. I mean, I can do architecture from designing a barn out there in the field. I can design a castle on top of a hill and still achieve architecture. Town planning is about the policies and the rules and of planning harmonious interactions and the existence of people in a town or in a village, or restructuring what is already there. Urban design is what sits in between architecture and urban design, and rather in town planning. If you are an architect in the first place, you should be able to take all those plans that were made and extrude them into 3 dimensions to be able to capture the spaces between the buildings, the spaces called squares, spaces called streets, and make sure that they align with the human senses. They are functional to the human needs and enjoyment. They deal with the elements, the sun, the wind, and the rain, to be able to look after men. Now we are talking about accommodating men in the open space, that's urban design. So the volumes of buildings, the shapes of buildings, and how the buildings interrelate with the open spaces, how your landscape, which is where the sky and the earth meet, when we look out there, it's called the landscape.
Yes.
And the skyscape. The skyscape is where the sky is meeting the top of those trees, tops of those trees, and the top of those skyscrapers and so on. I'm using these metaphors to try and make it easier for the ordinary man out there.
Yes, yes.
All these fields work together, but you can study them separately. In my case, I studied in the 70s and early 80s, so I knew where I was going to. I knew that I was going to be asked to address urban situations in the country. I knew I was going to be asked to address architecture or individual building circumstances.
An artist usually transforms his personality into the art, right? So how have your personal values shaped the way you approach design and leadership and eventually crafted your design philosophy?
Yes, I think every piece of building, or if I were to call it architecture, carries the spirit of the architect. And if you are lucky, and if you have been successful in crafting that piece of building, it will carry the spirit of the owners. And if God breathed into it as well, it will have the spirit of the community. So for me, architecture is a very, very seriously spiritual profession. If you walk into a cathedral, designed proper cathedral, St. Peter's in Rome, and so on, you can't just walk into that building and not feel anything. You just can't. There are certain spaces, even the bush itself, sometimes you walk into the bush, walk into a cave, walk into a crowd of people and so on. Something, you feel something happen to you. Some energy must be zapped out of you or must be zapped into you. And buildings do that to me. My own buildings that I've designed, I'm very attached to them. Sometimes I visit them and my heart sinks if they're not looked after. I have spent money in cases where someone is not. Some people are not looking after houses that are done, or they changed something that actually destroyed the whole thing of the design. And I would humbly and take all the time to explain why the window was round and not square. I remember a specific case, I won't say which building. My client, I had a perfectly round window in an acute triangle and a square window and a much longer window at the bottom, just 3 levels, attic, first floor, ground floor. And we changed the window at the top to a rectangle and everything fell apart. But I sat down, went through how these spaces related to the overall envelope of the building and so on. And others had been telling them that this building used to be so beautiful. What has happened to it? They couldn't tell what had gone wrong. And my client had no problems. Since the window was a little smaller than I wanted it. Okay, fine. Let's do a circular window but bigger. And we agreed, and I paid for that window. Because it's my work, and if they agree, for me, it's like a painting. If I've made that painting, even if I sell it to you, it's still mine. I will come one day to borrow it to go and exhibit it at a gallery. The copyright in that piece of art is mine.
I agree that you have designed, you've done your part as an architect, but once you release it to the client, it no longer belongs to you, it belongs to the next person.
It's very true.
So how they define it now becomes...
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me say this. If I design a building, it is that image that I own, and I call that image copyright. You can destroy it, you can paint it differently, you can break it into pieces, you can extend it, and it's really, you own the physical manifestation of my imagination. I keep the imagination and keep the copyright. And that copyright is in the design, not in the edifice. I'm lucky if you can maintain that building.
In your article, you talk about the transcendence of space into place, right? That once you're designing a space, but once someone occupies that space, it becomes a place.
Yes.
So could you elaborate a bit on it?
Let me first of all proceed by indicating that that is not necessarily to be found in the Oxford English Dictionary. I needed to be able to describe the same place, if you like, because you may have it as a place. Take the pot. It's a place. But once you have Barakana in there, it's defined by what the activity that is happening in it. But once the Barakana moves out and we have Pujari, Kanabohuera in the outer, it transcends to another space that is housing Huera. Let's say you have in that space the activity this time is say something like celebration of harvest talk. The space changes again. So it is in the argument of the spirit of space. If it was just a place and now it has transcended to another spiritual activity being a place. That's what I'm talking to. And if you appreciate that as an architect, you need to accommodate, you need to design spaces that they are robust enough to accommodate different activities. And here, the activities, I'm not looking at it as physical activities, I'm talking about spiritual activities. So that is the feeling I was talking about earlier, that you enter space and you feel something. You feel embraced by that space, and the space embraces you differently from place to place.
Thinking about architecture as nation building, in your view, how does architecture reflect and shape our national identity?
I thought you were going to ask me that. Well, that is a very, very, very important question or an important intervention. Let's start it this way. If I say Rome, it conjures a certain image in me.
Yes.
If I say Vatican, the Vatican conjures certain images in St. Peter's, cathedrals and so on. If I say London, if I say Venezia or Venice, or Venice, if I say to you Florence, immediately you have got a certain picture in your mind.
Yeah.
That is identity. And people identify itself with its buildings. Ha re ba nye go twe ra go di toy kwa ga mabisi a ka. I know what came to my mind about Sorowe. If you were seeing it from Palama, we were looking at that village there. I know, having been at a very young age in an art class on Rokula, we went to Putariko when we were sketching the Mochudi village. I still have that picture in my mind. The current one I'm struggling to use to replace what I had as far back as 1977. Now, the image of a people is physically reflected in the image of its architecture. Architecture is a language. It's a language of habitation. It's a language of a people, how much they love themselves and how. If you look at the concept of, look at the Taha building its nest. The weaver knows what it's doing, and it's very serious about its habitation and about the protection of its eggs and the young and the whole family and so on. It's a very meticulous thing, and the concept of habitation is central to who you are. So a people defines itself by its architecture. If I say Pretoria and I say Johannesburg and I say Cape Town in the same country, I'm talking about three different images, and they talk culture, they talk a people's pride, they talk the meaning, and they talk the language of that people.
How do you then balance functionality with cultural symbolism in the projects that you do? Because we cannot deny the fact that yes, modernism is here, yes, evolution is here. We are growing and learning from different cultures, and we are seeing all those things from different countries, and we want to come back and incorporate these things. How do you then balance the functionality with cultural symbolism?
Right. To use other metaphors.
Yes.
Yeah. When I was at Median College, I was a dancer. I was a ballroom dancer. I was a late developer, so I was very shy. But ballroom dancing meant you had to be dancing with a lady. That broke that shyness. So I ended up being able to dance with those who were dancing to rock and roll. And it was rock and roll days. I was able to dance to samba and popular music and so on. Now, what I'm trying to say is, at the core of every activity, if it's dance, you'll be taught the basics of dance. Anything else that comes is called fashion. You'll be able to to take the core, the base of the dancing education and apply the basics of fashion. Dress it up in bell bottom and dress it up in whatever shape. In the same way, architecture works that way. If you understand the basics of architecture, the whole process I was saying, you can go to South America and bring South American architecture and lazy to the basics that you have done, and I can put up buildings. I've built for kings. I've built for King Mswati. helping for King Mosienyane to be the dead of Mosienyane, and so on. Those people are cultural monuments themselves, and they ooze with culture. So I have the basics and the rubrics of architecture, but I get into that space, I will meet architects. I will go to the relevant places and so on, and I will allow their culture to influence me in doing one, as much as I would allow fashion to influence my architecture. But it doesn't take away from the basics that define architecture for me.
Yeah. How do you reconcile? It might be the same as, but I think it's quite different. How do you reconcile modern architectural interventions with, now we're looking at town planning, right? With traditional town planning systems, particularly in African contexts where community spaces like the Kota carry a deep cultural meaning?
You see, as I was talking about architecture and fashion, let's start with the Kota. The Kota itself manifests because a people is affluent enough to have other people staying in the village to address issues of disputes, to address issues of entertainment, all issues, and then the Kota becomes central to matters a family or matters a village and matters a city. This is fundamental and central to all humanity. In the Greek days, we had the agora which was shaped in an amphitheater form, but so is the Kota. You had the forum in Italy, particularly in Rome. The Rome is the piazza centrally being more Mediterranean approach to Kota. You have the piazza. Now, all these spaces themselves, whether it's modern architecture, whether it's antiquity, whether it's Rococo, Renaissance, you name it, Corinthian, all those spaces were there and they remain to be there. What you are seeing is different material interpretations. Someone was building with stone, someone is now building with wood or something, and then now you have technical advances such that we can handle materials differently. What has not changed is the space that is being captured is the same. The quality of the space has not moved. All that we are saying is we are seeing the same beautiful lady dressed in different attires at different times. That's whether it's modern, now when you talk town planning, you are talking spaces and places and so on. What was not achievable in the days of antiquity, for instance, is achievable now. That might mean that the space that used to be very large now is smaller, but it's still being able to accommodate the same activities and probably even the same numbers of people. But at the end of the day, nothing changes with the essence of town planning, the essence of architecture. The size of the block in a city, or the size, let's start with the street. You go to London, there's something called London City, which is that central place in London by the River Thames, and that place accommodates 10,000 people. And Greater London accommodates 10 million people. Now, if you take London City, that London City, the roads are very narrow because they were designed for the horse cart and the pedestrian. The car is calm, the car is adapted to the city. But then you go to the greater city of London, now roads are wider and so on, and you can take buses, you can take bigger vehicles and so on. Nothing has changed. The size of the square is still there. The size of the potla or the forum, or in England, the equivalent of the forum or the potla is what is called the village square. Yeah. That's basically what it is. And all those components are still there even now. We call them by different names. Now, I mean, you have celebratory spaces, you have spaces for mourning, spaces for doing everything. But at the end of the day, we still go to the graveyard to celebrate exactly what we celebrated all along. Yes.
Okay. Now, in all your designs, I have come to notice that your theme is the water. So you could have picked anything that pertaining our culture, right? It could have been anything. Why did you specifically choose our focus on the water as my theme or design philosophy?
Yeah. The water, in my opinion, is the center of the village. If you are arriving in a town, you look for where the water is. If you are arriving in Gaborone, you look for where the National Assembly is, which is the People's Quarter. So, in my Motswana conception, the way I'm made, water is central to everything I do. Everything I've designed has been themed with the water at the center. You can go to let's mention a few, the Institute of Health Sciences in Lekwalo, where you enter into a big round square. A square can be round, and in this case, the water is a square because that's where the British would say the public square or the village square. You enter into that square, take the exam council, what is it called? Botswana Examinations Council. You enter into this big round square which helps you to distribute I find the square or the potluck to be a very, very good motive for distributing activities and arranging where you do it. If you get into a potluck, you can find yourself as you are lost and suddenly you see a potluck in a village, you go to the potluck and you wait there. Often you'll find a fire there, someone will come from one of the houses embracing the potluck, and you'd ask them who you are looking for, and tell them, and they say, oh, no, he's my neighbor that house there, and so on. Even if by that name that you tell them, they will tell you, oh, no, he belongs to such and such a potluck. So it's easier to find your potluck than to find an individual house. We are finding a cluster, and a potluck is more than just that little palisade of wood or rock or whatever. But the potluck has been a very important arrangement area for me. It helps me to distribute, arrange, and find myself. When I'm designing, I keep on going back to the potluck, to the center where I started. The whole village will ready from there. But I will observe the need for the car, the need for the pedestrian, the need for administration, the need for all those things, but still have the potluck as your center.
The center.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Using the potluck to explore the different configurations that a space may take as it performs various activities, right? It's mundane and spiritual. You have emphasized that Tswana placemaking is not just functional but also spiritual. Could you explain how spirituality is encoded in the design and use of space in Tswana settlements?
You've articulated that very well. It calls for me to try and speak to that level and admire that. Yes, as I said, here when we're talking about beauty, structural complexity or structural sensibility and functionality, I said these things are all intrinsic into each other. So a potluck itself, in my writings I've published on the potluck quite a bit. The potluck in the Setswana setting is an altar. It's that space that sits between us the living and our forefathers. In Setswana, the creator. I'm happy to call him Yahweh, and he is the same God Just like you have engines and others in other cultures, we have the living, we have the potla, we have the potla itself. You can never say my potla. Even a chief cannot say that is my potla. He says potla ya bora, potla ya bora se mama. Just like if you call me what you call so rasa mama. How come otherwise you're being arrogant and so on. Now, the reason for that is this potla, we own it with our forefathers. And it sits between us and our forefathers. So it is actually an altar. It has always been an altar. You find altars in the Bible, in every culture and so on, and that was our altar. So, like I said, a space that is occupied by men is spiritual. Let me give you an example. When we grew up, you'd come into a compound, thunderbolts and so on, and that one thunderbolt there would have a small stick forming the threshold of the door, just loose laid there. No man would cross that stick. Even girls of a certain age would not cross that stick. Only old people, ladies, would cross them. The reason for that is there is a body, a young baby that has been born in that roundabout. There's an internment, there's a young baby there with a mother. And once there's a little baby like that, that space has transcended from just a space into a place. The containment of that spiritual being called man, called the baby and mother, has changed the space into a spiritual space. Now, once the space has achieved that, you have to think twice about entering that. But we know physically, it is meant to nurture the young body, to protect it and so on from illnesses and all kinds of things. But the space has changed into a spiritual space. If you walk into Komagite, Kasetswana, you don't just walk rampantly as you like and so on. You are entering a spiritual space. So for so long as there is man in that house, for so long as man, human activity in that place, it is a spiritual thing. And once you treat it with that and design with that in mind, you are cautioned every time you take a pen and a paper to draw. You are cautioned internally to think, hang on, I'm entering a spiritual space. And once you get to that spiritual space, I have given a talk once, which was highly criticized, but I remember talking, I was very young, I just graduated early 80s, and I was talking about this feeling of reading a huge white paper on a drawing board, and you're starting a city. And this is what happened to me when I started Makala. There was that day, it was just a farm with a few piggeries here and there, and crows. And the Pakalani city faced me as a blank piece of paper. Yeah. And I was explaining that whenever this happens, I've seen others who will rely on smoking, drinking coffee, marijuana.
To get the inspiration.
Thinking they're getting inspiration. But I come from a prayerful background. So for me, I'll kneel and call my God. But really, I still do that. I will not, even when you ask me to do a house, I will meditate, I'll pray about it, and I'll ask God to help me respect you, to give you the respect of that spiritual being that I'm going to accompany. So I'm talking about myself, but like I'm saying, building is a living thing, is a containment of man, and if it contains man. A crow, a cattle crow, it's not spiritual. But the altar is spiritual. The house is spiritual. And it is because of For so long as we agree that man is a spiritual animal, and the containment of man, and the containment of man, human activity. That one was childbirth, spiritual. That one is spiritual. That one is for every activity, and each activity has got its own spirit. You are not going to tell me that the spirit is the same. It's not. But the beauty is the water can transcend these spaces. It's basically changing its spirit. There are times when we are, as Africa, propitiating the gods. That happens in African culture. The fact that, it happened in the Old Testament, but it doesn't happen in the New Testament. And often people get confused here. When you say propitiation of the gods, propitiation, you know what propitiation means. Yes, that's where you're going to be told to do whatever for it may desire. Okay. Happens in the water is a spiritual activity. And I'm saying all men's activities are spiritual.
In your article, that's like the saying transcendence from space to place. It depends on the time, the location, and the circumstance.
Exactly.
Okay, so now, how do you translate the spatial qualities, right, of the Kotla, the openness, circularity, centrality, into your architectural language now? If you are designing like a civic place or a school or whatever, how do you translate those into that?
I'm trying to think of a building that it doesn't have to be secure, but you are right, it has to be central. I'm using the potla as the arrival space. I'm looking at the potla as the place of reconnaissance. You arrive in that space, and everyone in the potla is equal. The strong which says, "Mawakwa potla, mantiwuki." Everyone can have a say. So my architecture, you arrive in the potla at all times. The nearest example in town here is the Botswana Technical Services building as you go to the airport. There's that tiny little building on the other end. You enter into a central space. From there you can proceed to the warehouses, can exit to the parking, you can go to the gym, you can go to the offices, upstairs, downstairs. You are organized. The Portland is a great organizer. But as you enter there, you can be received, you can have coffee and so on. It's a space for all. If I design a house, I make sure that the sitting room is not the central place. It's a living room. But you don't have to necessarily run through the family room. As you come into your house, the children will be playing in the family room. The folks maybe have visitors in the living room. And it should be seen, so to speak, the space that you enter, the entrance hall is your portal. And in some houses, like the one where we are now, the entrance hall is your portal. So it's the whole open space, what I call the public space. In space arrangement, you have the public space and the private space. But from the public space out there, you enter into the semi-public space or semi-private space. There's difference. We are in a semi-private space here where we are. We are not in my office.
Yeah.
We are in some space that leads to that. But the space that links where we are to the door and all those spaces out there is the portal. And from that portal, everyone is equal.
You would say that it fosters connectivity and it unifies how space planning works.
Exactly. It helps you to plan space. But above all, it makes you feel equal. It makes you feel welcome. It makes you feel I've not intruded into someone's private space. It's semi-private. Because it's either semi-private or semi-public. If it's the hotel right at the entrance is semi-public. You own it because you're part of the public. But you can't just go to the gym. You have to ask permission at that level. You can't just go to the workshops. You can't just go to people's offices. You need to be, it's a hall, but it's treated more like a hotel, properly. But how horrible of a hotel, you've not intruded in the private spaces of the hotel. That is how adults will behave.
So to a layman who doesn't know, who doesn't quite understand what you're saying, because someone might be thinking you are talking about the khota, but they know the khota as, to a layman it could be that when you are entering a building, you are entering the reception area or the lounge area. That would be like what the khota is meant to symbolize, right?
Yeah, but the khota, the difference between the khota and just an ordinary reception is that when you're in the khota, you're not lost.
Yeah.
When you're in the khota, you feel like you own it, you're part of it. But a reception, if it's designed properly, it will make you feel like I'm not intruding. It will make you feel like I can wait here to be received. This is a reception. This space is designed in such a way that I'm likely to meet somebody here. And so the chances are you'll find water and a water station, or something, today's spaces, you enter into spaces like that and there's a coffee machine or something. There's someone to sit, you can sit, and someone arrives, you can ask where you want to go. You're not lost.
The hotline emphasizes dialogue and communal decision making, right? Do you incorporate participatory design elements that echo this tradition?
Very much. When I design that hotline, there will be a hotline to lead to other hotline. And the whole idea of design is let's just take the space where we are. This used to be my house. I practice here now. But we're not doing my office. Feel about time. There are other places like the sitting room itself, the dining room, the family rooms, and so on. If you look at the way they're being used now, they encourage, once you're in that space, everyone comes and you're all discussing design or whatever that you want to say. It's different from closing yourself away in your own room. When I design buildings, I ensure that for every cluster of offices, there is an open space that links to all those offices. So you transcend that space. If you make sure you make sure that people pass through that space, then people will actually discuss and feel part of it. There's no secret about things here. It's not the same as living in an office, but you have spaces that are transitional spaces, but they're meaningful spaces where you can get together to chat, you can get together to meet, but the meeting is arranged in such a manner that you can see, oh, this is a forum.
Now, how has colonial urbanism disrupted the presence or visibility of the hotline in towns and cities? Like
Litsile won the gold last year, and we needed to celebrate. We went to a football stadium. Where are our celebratory spaces? We need those partners in town, in Pablo, so that when Litsile gets a gold, we have somewhere to go and celebrate. President of Namibia, Kiango, died last year, and we went to bury him at the Heroes Park. In Ghana, we go to the Heroes Park. That's where you'll find their former heroes. In Zimbabwe, in South Africa. When you design a city, we may be talking order, but those things give you order as well. Our kids are buried, depending on which tribe you come from. We bury our kids in the core, and I'm saying we need to start looking at our cities, because the colonial masters could not understand our concept of burying our kings in the core. That thing seems to have been lost. I mean, cities that were designed for purposes of administration after the colonial days have lost direction, they've lost the thread in terms of, yes, Gaborone, we still need to intervene into Gaborone, because the intervention have failed at all costs here, because most planners who receive the plans from outside of from within themselves are trying to rehabilitate colonial planning. Terms like statistics, people take any of the new towns and so on. I mean, to just come there with some sticks and put them, like I probably said, around an over tree, in the middle of nowhere in a park, it's not a Kotla. A Kotla must breathe, must live, it must feel like it's embraced by people. It must belong to the people, and people must use it. There must be the point where you stand there, you know you're not lost. You can be found. Yeah. Gaborone needs that, Sindi Bigger, Orapa needs that, all these towns. But if you go to Soroe,
Is it maintained?
there's paradise there. When you stand there, someone will come and ask you, and they'll ask you with all the respect and humility, and they will help you find the water where you're going. Even when you arrive at the water where you are supposed to be going, you will find again someone will help you there also. And this is not written, this is silent. I know our cities miss this. It doesn't have to be designed like my village in Ramuto, Ubonong, and so, no. It has, our towns must actually have in mind that I mean, if you look at the cities like the city of Kush, ancient cities, older than London, older than Rome, so they're serious cities, but they had Kotla and they were linked. These Kotlas were actually linked. And you see a lot of African cities, Timbuktu, you know, all these cities have this arrangement of open spaces that were public spaces, active public spaces, forums, you want to call them, agoras, you want to call them, or piazzas, but they were kotlas, called in their own unique